Royal Guard LOADS his rifle, after Princess Charlotte is stripped of clothes for security search. The air inside the Grand Palace felt charged with anticipation as the morning sun poured through the tall windows, casting a soft golden light over the meticulously polished floors. It was the kind of event that always drew attention, not just because of the royal family's presence, but because of the heightened security that had been implemented for this particular occasion. The rumors had been swirling for weeks about potential threats, and everyone knew that this day would be different from all the others. Princess Charlotte, one of the most admired members of the royal family, was due to arrive shortly. The palace staff, who had been preparing for days, moved swiftly through the halls, ensuring every detail was in place. The ceremonial guards stood tall, their uniforms pristine, as they made their final checks around the premises. They had all been briefed about the security procedures that would be followed. For some, it was just another day in the line of duty. But for others, there was a palpable tension in the air, a feeling that something important was about to unfold. The day had started like any other, with the sound of early morning activity echoing throughout the palace. Staff members scurried around, ensuring the safety of the royals was the highest priority. The princess had become somewhat of an icon, and the palace was well aware that with such fame came risk. Princess Charlotte had always been a symbol of grace, elegance, and composure. Her charm was not just in her looks, but in the way she carried herself. She was beloved by the public, and her every move was watched by the media and the people. For the most part, the princess was used to the spotlight. But today, the stakes were higher, and the tension in the palace was hard to ignore. As the royal convoy neared the palace, the mood shifted. The streets were lined with people who had gathered to catch a glimpse of the princess, their eyes filled with admiration. The motorcade was shielded from public view, yet the feeling of something significant approaching lingered in the air. Inside the palace walls, the security teams were preparing for the rigorous checks that would follow the princess's arrival. The head of security, a stern yet efficient man named Colonel Harper, had been tasked with overseeing the safety of the royal family for years. He had seen it all, the parades, the celebrations, the countless royal visits, but nothing ever felt as tense as today. The intelligence reports he had received in the past few weeks had suggested that there were potential threats targeting the princess, and his role was now more critical than ever. Colonel Harper paced back and forth, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He understood the importance of his job. There was no room for error. He had briefed his team extensively on the protocols for the day. Every guard was instructed to remain vigilant, as there had been an increase in suspicious activity in the past months. As his eyes met those of the royal guard standing at attention, he gave a nod of reassurance. These men and women were some of the best-trained security personnel in the world, but even they were feeling the strain of the situation. As the princess's car pulled up to the entrance, the tension was almost unbearable. The streets outside were filled with the low hum of anticipation as the people waited, eager to catch a glimpse of their beloved royal. Inside the palace, the security officers took their positions, standing in perfect formation, their faces unreadable. The princess's arrival was the culmination of weeks of planning, and they were ready to carry out their duty with precision. Princess Charlotte's car came to a slow stop in front of the grand staircase. The moment the vehicle doors opened, the crowd outside erupted in cheers. The princess stepped out, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the vicinity. She was dressed in a stunning royal gown, the intricate design sparkling under the sun's rays. As her eyes scanned the crowd, she offered a warm smile, her demeanor calm and collected despite the tension of the day. Her royal guards quickly surrounded her, their eyes scanning the area for any potential threats. Though they had trained for every possible scenario, the sense of danger today felt real. The palace had never seen such stringent measures before. But for Princess Charlotte, this was part of her life. She had been raised in the shadow of danger, her every move scrutinized by the public. Yet she had learned to thrive in it, to remain composed in the face of uncertainty. Today, however, the circumstances felt different. The moment the princess stepped onto the palace grounds, Colonel Harper gave the signal, and the guards immediately began ushering her inside, their movements swift and deliberate. The high walls of the palace, which were usually a symbol of protection and safety, now felt like a fortress. The gates closed behind them with a resounding clang, cutting off any hope of getting close to the princess. The security perimeter had been sealed, and no one outside the designated area would be allowed entry without proper clearance. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The palace was still breathtaking, its grand halls decorated with portraits of past monarchs, its walls lined with tapestries that told the story of a royal lineage. Yet, despite its beauty, there was an undeniable unease in the air. The princess was escorted to the security checkpoint, where the routine search would take place. It wasn't an unusual procedure. All visitors, including members of the royal family, had to go through security screening. Yet for Princess Charlotte, the idea of being subjected to such measures was foreign. The princess was always treated with the utmost respect, her every need met with the highest standards. But today, the situation was different. The heightened security had forced the palace to adopt stricter protocols, even for the royal family. As the princess approached the security checkpoint, she glanced over at the officers stationed along the perimeter. Their eyes were carefully trained on her, watching her every move. She could sense the unease in the room, the discomfort that accompanied her being subjected to such a process. Yet she knew the importance of the screening. The safety of the royal family was paramount, and she had come to understand that it was necessary to follow these measures, no matter how uncomfortable they might be. The security team had been briefed on the procedures, and as part of the heightened protocol, a full body search was required. While it was not uncommon for high-profile individuals to undergo such checks, it was always handled with the utmost discretion. But today, the scrutiny felt more intense than ever. The staff inside the palace knew the search was necessary, but the thought of the princess being subjected to such an ordeal left a bitter taste in their mouths. It was a sign of just how serious the threats had become. Princess Charlotte remained composed as the security personnel gently instructed her to step forward. Her guards were at her side, their expressions steely, watching every movement with great care. The moment felt surreal, as though time had slowed down. The princess's dignified posture never wavered, despite the increasingly invasive nature of the security measures. With a gentle but firm voice, the security officer requested that the princess remove some of her clothing as part of the check. It was a procedure that all guests were required to undergo, but for the princess, it felt more like a violation than a precaution. The room was filled with hushed whispers, the air thick with tension as the princess reluctantly complied. At that moment, the eyes of the guards, the staff, and even the media outside the palace were all on the princess. It was a difficult moment for everyone involved, a reminder that the safety of those in the public eye often came at the cost of personal comfort and dignity. The princess had always known this, but it was harder than ever to accept. The search, though necessary, would mark the beginning of a series of events that would soon spiral out of control. As the princess stood there, the tension in the room seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and the quiet murmurs of the staff and guards echoed faintly in the background. The usual comfort of the grand palace seemed far away, replaced by a sense of unease. Princess Charlotte, known for her grace and poise, had always been a figure of strength, but even she couldn't ignore the strange feeling that settled over her in this moment. The officers at the security checkpoint, despite their professionalism, were visibly uncomfortable. This wasn't something they had ever expected to be a part of when they joined the royal security team. Their training had always focused on protecting the princess from external threats, ensuring she remained safe from harm in the most dignified manner possible. But this, having to be the ones to oversee her security measures, was something none of them had anticipated. The princess's guards, standing nearby, exchanged nervous glances. They had been with her through countless royal events, celebrations, and even emergencies, but today felt different. Their usual composure seemed shaken. They, too, had been informed of the heightened security measures, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of what was happening now. Princess Charlotte remained calm on the surface, her regal posture unbroken as she faced the officers, but beneath her composed exterior, her heart raced. She understood the need for the security checks, but the idea of being subjected to this level of scrutiny was a bitter pill to swallow. She had spent her entire life in the public eye, but being forced into a situation where her dignity might be compromised, no matter how necessary the search, felt like an invasion of her privacy. It was hard to reconcile the fact that, despite her royal status, she was still just a person, subject to the same rules as anyone else when it came to safety. As the officers prepared to begin the search, the princess couldn't help but feel a wave of discomfort wash over her. She knew it was just a routine procedure, but there was something about the way the officers' eyes flicked nervously between each other that made the situation feel more intrusive than it should have. They were trying to be as respectful as possible, but the mere act of stripping away the layers of her clothing felt like a violation of everything she had been taught to uphold as a member of the royal family. She glanced over at her guards, whose faces were filled with concern. They were trying to maintain their professional composure, but their eyes betrayed their unease. The situation had quickly escalated from a simple security check to something that was causing discomfort for everyone involved. The princess took a deep breath, determined to keep her composure. She could feel the weight of the moment, and the eyes of the entire palace seemed to be on her. The officers were now speaking to her in quiet tones, explaining the procedure as calmly as they could. Their voices lacked the usual confidence they carried when they were in control of a situation. The princess, though uneasy, nodded in acknowledgement. She knew that this wasn't just about her. It was about the safety of everyone in the palace, and the responsibility of protecting her went beyond her personal comfort. Still, as she stood there waiting for the procedure to begin, the air in the room felt charged, almost electric. She couldn't help but wonder if the security measures were truly necessary, or if they were just a reaction to the fear of potential threats. She had always been surrounded by an army of advisors and guards, yet today it felt as though the walls of the palace were closing in on her, trapping her in a world where every action was scrutinized and every moment held the possibility of danger. The officers moved closer, their hands gently guiding her through the process. There was no harshness in their movements, no sense of urgency, but the air was thick with tension nonetheless. The princess stood still, her face a mask of grace, as she allowed them to carry out the procedure. It felt almost surreal, as though she had stepped out of the royal bubble she had always known and into a world where privacy no longer existed. As the search continued, the princess could hear the soft rustling of fabric, the quiet hum of the guards moving about, and the distant echo of footsteps as people passed by in the corridors. The sounds, so familiar in other circumstances, only seemed to emphasize the strange nature of what was happening. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but she refused to let any of it show. After all, she had been trained for this. Being a member of the royal family meant that the public eye was always on you, and you had to be prepared for anything. At that moment, a slight noise from the corner of the room caught her attention. It was one of the royal guards who had stepped forward, his face a mixture of concern and uncertainty. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, and she could see the conflict within him. He had always been her protector, but today he was bound by duty to follow the security procedures that had been set in place. His discomfort was palpable, but his loyalty was unwavering. He was just one of many who had been assigned to ensure her safety, yet today, the line between protecting her and respecting her personal boundaries seemed blurred. He stood silently, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword as he observed the search from a distance. Despite his calm exterior, the princess could see the struggle in his eyes. He had sworn an oath to protect her, but now he found himself helpless in the face of a procedure that felt more like an invasion than a precaution. The officers, unaware of the emotional weight carried by the guard, continued their task, moving with careful precision as they ensured the princess was thoroughly checked. Every moment felt like it dragged on, but Charlotte remained composed. She had been trained to be strong, to hide her emotions from the world. But in this moment, the princess felt like a stranger in her own life, as though she had lost the ability to control her own narrative. As the search neared its conclusion, the room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The officers stepped back, offering the princess a polite but distant nod, signaling that the procedure was complete. She quickly regained her composure, standing tall as she adjusted her clothing, feeling the weight of the moment settle upon her. Her royal attire, though meticulously arranged, seemed to offer little protection against the vulnerability she had just experienced. The tension in the room was palpable as the princess exchanged a brief, knowing glance with her guard. They both understood the gravity of the situation. Though the search had been completed without incident, it had opened a door to a reality that neither of them had anticipated. In the end, the princess's dignity remained intact, but it was clear that something had shifted. This event, though a mere blip in the grand scheme of things, would stay with them all for a long time. As she made her way through the palace, accompanied by her guards, the world outside seemed far removed from the sterile, tense atmosphere that had just unfolded within the palace walls. The princess knew that the public would soon forget the small moments of discomfort that had marked the day. But for her, it was a reminder that even those who were destined to live in palaces, to wear crowns, and to be adored by millions were not exempt from the harsh realities of the world they lived in. The princess looked ahead, her steps purposeful, but the unease that had lingered would not soon fade. She had faced a challenge to her dignity today, and though she had risen above it, the memory would stay with her, a quiet reminder of the cost of royal life. The princess stood in the middle of the room, her heart racing but her face betraying nothing. The search, which had begun as a routine check, had somehow become something much more. The officers had gone through the motions, and while there had been no deliberate malice, the situation felt more invasive than it should have. For a moment, the princess felt as though her world had shifted. The dignity she had always carried so effortlessly seemed just out of reach. It was as if the walls of the palace, which had always been a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. As she readjusted her gown and straightened her posture, the princess tried to shake off the lingering discomfort. She had been through countless public events, faced press conferences, and even dealt with protests, but nothing had ever quite shaken her like this. The reality of her position, the expectations, the constant scrutiny, and now the intrusion of privacy was more evident than ever. But despite everything, she held her composure. Her parents, the royal advisors, and the countless staff members who surrounded her day in and day out had always instilled in her the importance of maintaining grace, especially in moments of difficulty. So she squared her shoulders, adjusted her crown, and tried to move forward. The officers, now finished with their part of the search, stepped back, giving her space. There was a brief moment of silence, where the room seemed to hold its breath, as if everyone was unsure of how to move forward. The princess's guards, ever watchful, kept their eyes trained on the officers and on her, ensuring that no further incidents would occur. But even they couldn't hide the look of concern that flickered in their eyes. They had seen the princess face challenges before, but nothing quite like this. It wasn't just about security anymore, it was about dignity, about respect. The princess nodded politely to the officers as they began to withdraw, their eyes darting to one another nervously. It wasn't easy, having your every movement scrutinized by so many, especially when your privacy had been violated in such a public way. The princess understood the necessity of security, but she couldn't help but feel that this had crossed a line. She had trusted her safety to the guards, and though they had done their job, the whole event had left her feeling exposed, vulnerable in ways she hadn't been in a long time. As she made her way down the hallway, the sound of her heels echoed in the otherwise silent palace. Her footsteps felt heavy, as though they carried the weight of the day's events. She was met by her trusted advisor, Lord Harrison, who had been with her since her early childhood. His face was filled with concern as he took a step toward her. The moment they locked eyes, she saw the unspoken question in his gaze. "Are you all right?" The princess took a deep breath, her lips curling into a faint smile. "I'm fine, Lord Harrison," she replied, though her voice lacked its usual warmth. "It's just been a long day." He didn't press her for more details, but the concern didn't leave his eyes. He knew her better than anyone, and he could see that this was more than just a long day. It was the realization that, even within the walls of the palace, she was not safe from intrusion. It was the understanding that her every move, even her most personal moments, were subject to the judgment of others. He followed her as she moved down the hallway, offering her silent support as they approached the grand dining room. The grand dining room, with its high ceilings and towering windows, looked just as it always did, bathed in the warm light of the late afternoon. But today, even the luxury of the space seemed to mock the princess. The beautifully arranged table, set with fine china and crystal, felt more like an elaborate stage than a place of comfort. She had never felt so distant from her surroundings. As they reached the door, Lord Harrison hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Perhaps it would be best to take a moment to rest, Your Highness," he suggested, his voice filled with concern. "The day has been taxing, and you've handled everything with the grace that you always do, but a brief reprieve might help clear your mind." The princess thought for a moment, her gaze drifting to the view outside the window. The garden, once a place of peaceful reflection, now seemed distant. "You're right," she said softly. "I need some time alone." Lord Harrison nodded and stepped aside, allowing her to pass. He knew the princess well enough to understand that sometimes solitude was the best remedy. She needed time to process everything that had happened, to regain the sense of control she had momentarily lost. As she made her way to her private chambers, the corridor felt oddly empty. The usual bustle of palace staff, the servants, the guards, today everything seemed subdued, hushed. Even the usual hum of conversations from distant rooms had faded away. The princess reached her chambers and closed the door gently behind her. She walked over to the window, where the evening light was beginning to soften the sharp edges of the world outside. The sounds of the palace seemed muffled from here, and for the first time all day she allowed herself to breathe deeply. The weight of the search, the invasion of her privacy, was still there, lingering like a shadow. But as she looked out over the gardens, she could almost hear the soft rustle of the leaves in the breeze, the familiar sound that always brought her peace. The world outside was calm, even though inside the palace, things had taken a turn she had not expected. Her mind wandered back to the security officers. They had been simply doing their jobs, following the protocol they had been given. But the princess couldn't help but feel that something had gone wrong. It wasn't just the procedure itself, it was the way it had made her feel. It wasn't enough to know that her safety was being protected. She had always trusted her guards and security personnel, but now she wondered if that trust had been broken, if her own sense of safety had been compromised in a way she couldn't easily repair. The princess slowly sat down in the chair by the window, her hands resting on her lap. She closed her eyes, the exhaustion of the day catching up with her. The weight of the crown, both literal and metaphorical, felt heavy, but she knew she couldn't let this moment define her. She was a princess, and she had to remain strong. It was what was expected of her, and it was what she had always done. But today had shaken something deep within her, something she had never been forced to confront before. After a few moments of silence, the princess opened her eyes and stood up, her resolve returning. She knew that she couldn't let this experience haunt her. She had a duty to the people, to her family, and to herself. But as she made her way to the door to rejoin the royal event, the reality of what had happened stayed with her. It wasn't just a search. It was a reminder that no matter how high your status, no matter how many walls you built around yourself, you were never truly free from the watchful eyes of the world. The princess had spent the last few hours in her chambers, trying to push the weight of the day's events from her mind. But the truth was, no matter how hard she tried to shake off the discomfort, it lingered like an unwelcome shadow. Her thoughts kept circling back to what had happened in the security room. She had spent her entire life in the spotlight, accustomed to the demands of royal duties, but this incident felt different. It wasn't just about her safety, it was about her dignity. She had always felt secure in the palace, but now she wondered if that security had been compromised in a way she couldn't easily fix. As she stood before her mirror, adjusting her gown for the evening's event, the weight of the situation weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had always prided herself on remaining composed, no matter what challenges life threw at her. But this time, it wasn't as easy. The search had felt invasive, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within her. The confidence she once had in the palace's security was now tinged with doubt. She ran her fingers through her hair, staring at her reflection. The girl who looked back at her was still the princess, graceful, poised, and composed, but beneath the surface she felt a crack. She wasn't sure how to handle this new reality. In the past, when something had gone wrong, she could rely on her guards, her advisors, and her family. But now, she felt like she was standing alone, facing a situation that didn't have a simple solution. The door to her chambers opened with a soft creak, and Lord Harrison stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the room before settling on her. His expression softened when he saw her standing there, deep in thought. He had been her trusted advisor for many years, and he knew her better than anyone. He could see the strain on her face, the way her usual calm was now overshadowed by something darker. "Your Highness," he began, his voice gentle but filled with concern, I can see that the events of the day have taken their toll on you. Is there anything I can do to help?" The princess turned to face him, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Lord Harrison," she replied, though her voice lacked its usual warmth. "I just need some time to think." Lord Harrison nodded, understanding that she needed space. He had known her for years, and he knew that she valued her independence. But he also knew that today had been different. "If you need anything, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask," he said, his tone soft yet firm. "You've carried the weight of this royal life with grace for so long, but even the strongest among us need support." The princess gave a small nod, appreciating his words, though she still felt a deep sense of unease. She turned back to the mirror, unable to meet his gaze any longer. "I'll be fine, Lord Harrison," she repeated, her voice firmer this time, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. He lingered for a moment, watching her with a mixture of admiration and worry. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. The princess was alone again, left to her own thoughts and the quiet hum of the palace. She didn't know how long she stood there, lost in her reflection. The grandeur of the palace seemed distant now. The elegant furniture, the gleaming marble floors, and the polished chandeliers, nothing felt the same. It was as though the world outside her chambers was spinning, and she was stuck in place, unable to find her footing. The princess had never felt so vulnerable. Her mind wandered back to the security officers, their nervous glances and awkward movements as they carried out the search. She understood that they were simply following protocol, but the way the situation had unfolded left her feeling unsettled. It wasn't just the act of the search, it was the way it made her feel. Exposed, vulnerable, no longer the untouchable princess she had always been. It was a strange feeling, one that she hadn't experienced before. The princess took a deep breath and turned away from the mirror. She needed to move forward. She couldn't stay trapped in this moment, replaying every detail over and over again. There was still a royal event to attend, and she couldn't afford to let her personal discomfort get in the way of her duties. She had a role to play, and she needed to fulfill it. As she walked toward the door, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty room, she tried to focus on the task ahead. She would attend the event, smile for the cameras, and carry out her royal duties as expected. It was what she had always done, but today it felt different. The weight of the world felt heavier on her shoulders, and she wasn't sure how long she could keep up the facade of being the perfect princess. Stepping into the hallway, she was greeted by the familiar sight of her royal guards, standing at attention as they always did. Their eyes followed her every move, but their expressions remained unreadable. The princess couldn't help but feel a sense of discomfort as she walked past them. It wasn't that she didn't trust them. They had always been her protectors, her closest allies. But now something had shifted. The line between security and invasion had become blurry, and she wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. The evening event was being held in the grand ballroom, a magnificent room filled with crystal chandeliers, golden curtains, and marble floors. The guests, a mix of nobles, diplomats, and high-ranking officials, were already gathered, talking in hushed tones as they awaited the arrival of the royal family. The moment the princess entered the room, all eyes turned to her. She was the center of attention, as always. But tonight, as she walked through the ballroom, her usual confidence felt forced. The smiles and polite gestures of the guests seemed hollow, their faces a blur as she tried to navigate the crowd. She nodded at various dignitaries and exchanged pleasantries with those she knew, but her mind was elsewhere. Her heart wasn't in it. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Your Highness, it's good to see you," a nobleman greeted her, bowing slightly. "How was your afternoon?" The princess forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It was eventful," she replied, her voice carrying a touch of humor, though the words felt empty. "But I'm glad to be here now." The nobleman nodded, sensing that something was off but not pressing her for more. He turned to introduce her to a group of diplomats, and the princess followed, feeling like she was drifting through the evening rather than fully participating in it. The conversations around her blurred into background noise as she tried to keep her composure. She nodded at the right times, smiled at the right moments, but inside she was far away, lost in the swirling thoughts of the day's events. Her mind kept returning to the security breach, to the search that had left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. She had always prided herself on her ability to control her own narrative, but today, that control had slipped through her fingers. The princess wasn't sure how to reclaim it. She wasn't sure how to move forward in a world where her privacy had been compromised. As the evening wore on, the princess found herself retreating into her thoughts more and more. She smiled and made polite conversation, but it was all an act. The real Princess Charlotte, the one who had always been confident, graceful, and unshakable, felt distant. She wasn't sure how to face the world now, how to go back to being the person she had been before the search. The weight of the day pressed down on her, but she didn't know how to let go of it. The days following the royal event were quiet, but they were filled with a heavy sense of reflection for Princess Charlotte. The discomfort from the security check still lingered in her mind, though she had tried to focus on her royal duties and put the incident behind her. But every time she stood before the mirror, adjusting her gown or preparing for another event, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within her. The sense of invulnerability that had always come with her title, with her royal upbringing, had been shattered. She could no longer ignore the reality that even those in the highest positions were not immune from invasions of privacy. She had spent countless hours in meetings, smiling politely at dignitaries, attending ceremonies, and maintaining her public persona. To the outside world, everything seemed normal, and perhaps no one had noticed the quiet transformation happening within her. But Charlotte felt it, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her every time she entered a room or interacted with someone. The realization that she was not as untouchable as she once believed weighed heavily on her, but there was little room for vulnerability in the world she inhabited. She had always known that her life would be under constant scrutiny, but now she understood just how far that scrutiny could go. The palace staff moved around her with the usual precision, ensuring everything ran smoothly, but they, too, seemed to sense the subtle change in the princess. Her guards, especially, appeared to be more watchful, as though they were trying to gauge her mood, to make sure she wasn't slipping into a state of anxiety or doubt. But Charlotte kept up the act, as she always had. She smiled, nodded, and played her role as the graceful and poised royal. One afternoon, after a long day of ceremonial duties, Lord Harrison came to her chambers. He had been her advisor for years, a trusted friend, and someone who had always known when she needed a moment of honesty. He had watched her from the moment she was a young girl, and over time he had come to understand the subtle shifts in her demeanor. Today, when he entered her room, he found her standing by the window, staring out at the gardens below. Her eyes were distant, lost in thought. "Your Highness," he began, his voice warm and familiar, "I know something has been weighing on you. You can't keep carrying this burden alone." Charlotte didn't turn to face him right away. Instead, she gazed at the serene landscape outside the window, the lush greenery, the soft breeze that stirred the leaves of the trees. It all seemed so peaceful, so untouched by the chaos that occasionally plagued her life. Yet it felt like a world that was slipping further and further away from her grasp. "I'm fine, Lord Harrison," she said softly, her voice steady but lacking the usual warmth. "I've just been busy, that's all." Lord Harrison was not fooled by her words. He had known her long enough to see through the facade. He stepped closer, his eyes filled with concern. "You don't need to hide from me, Charlotte," he said gently. "I've been by your side for so many years. Whatever is troubling you, we can face it together." She finally turned to face him, her expression serious. "It's just, everything feels different now," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The search, the invasion of my privacy, it was all too much. I never imagined I would feel so exposed." Lord Harrison nodded, understanding more than words could express. He had always known that the pressure of royal life could be overwhelming, but seeing the toll it had taken on Charlotte was something he hadn't anticipated. The princess had always been the picture of grace, never letting the demands of her position show on her face. But now the cracks were beginning to show, and he could see the weight of the responsibility that had begun to wear on her. "I understand," he said quietly, offering her a reassuring smile. "But remember, Charlotte, you are not alone. You have always had the strength to get through even the toughest of situations. You faced challenges before, and you'll face many more in the future. This moment, though difficult, will pass, and you'll emerge stronger than ever." Charlotte looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude but also uncertainty. She had always relied on her strength, her ability to endure. But now she wasn't so sure. The sense of security she had once felt in her role as a royal seemed like a distant memory. She was now painfully aware that even the most powerful people could be vulnerable. The idea of being untouchable, of standing above the challenges of everyday life, had been shattered in an instant. "I don't know how to move forward from this," she confessed, her voice tinged with frustration. "Everything feels fragile. I've always believed that I could handle anything, that I could be the strong, unshakable leader the people expect. But now I'm not so sure." Lord Harrison stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her the same calm presence he always had. "You've faced far greater challenges than this, Charlotte. You've handled political unrest, personal loss, and the constant pressure of being in the public eye. You are stronger than you realize. This moment, this feeling of vulnerability, it will pass. And when it does, you'll be ready to face whatever comes next." Charlotte took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. She had spent so much of her life hiding behind a mask, keeping her emotions in check and her struggles hidden from the world. But now, for the first time, she was allowing herself to be vulnerable, to admit that she didn't have all the answers. And it felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "I suppose you're right," she said after a moment, her voice steadier than before. "Maybe I don't have to have everything figured out right now. Maybe it's okay to just be." Lord Harrison smiled, relieved to see the princess starting to regain her sense of calm. "Exactly. You don't have to do it all at once. Take the time you need. The world can wait." For the first time in days, Charlotte felt a small flicker of hope. She had spent so long trying to live up to the expectations placed on her, trying to be the perfect royal, the perfect princess. But in that moment, she realized that perfection wasn't the goal. It wasn't about being unshakable or flawless. It was about being true to herself, even if that meant facing her vulnerabilities. As the evening drew near, Charlotte made a quiet decision. She would attend the royal banquet, but she would do so on her own terms. She would smile and engage with her guests, but she would no longer hide behind the mask of perfection. She would be real, human, and authentic. It was a small step, but it felt like a breakthrough. Lord Harrison left her chambers, and the princess stood by the window once more, this time with a sense of peace. The gardens below were still, serene in the fading light of the day. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she also knew that she didn't have to face them alone. She was surrounded by those who cared for her, and she had the strength to overcome whatever came her way. And for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face the world again. In the weeks following the incident, the atmosphere at the palace gradually began to return to normal. The world outside seemed to move on, and the press, which had made a frenzy of the security breach, eventually turned its attention to other stories. But for Princess Charlotte, the events of that day continued to linger in her mind. She had tried to move past it, to focus on her duties, but there was no denying that something had shifted within her. The invulnerability she had once felt had been replaced with a new awareness, a realization that her life, no matter how carefully controlled, was not without its vulnerabilities. However, the princess was nothing if not resilient. She had always prided herself on her ability to adapt, to rise above the challenges life threw her way. And so, slowly but surely, she began to rebuild her sense of self. She spent more time with her family, reconnecting with her roots and the people who loved her. She had been so focused on her royal duties in the past that she had forgotten the simple joys of spending time with those who cared for her, away from the pressure of public life. It was in these moments of quiet, personal connection that Charlotte began to find her footing again. Her father, the king, had always been a pillar of strength for her. He had guided her through the early years of her training, teaching her how to navigate the complexities of royal life. Now, as the two of them sat together in the palace's private garden, the princess found herself leaning on his wisdom more than ever before. "Father," Charlotte said one afternoon, as they sat beneath the shade of a large oak tree, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened with the security check. I've always known that my life as a royal would come with certain sacrifices, but I never expected something like that. It's as if the world I've always known has shifted, and I'm not sure how to find my balance again." The king, always composed and thoughtful, looked at her with a gentle smile. "Charlotte," he said, his voice warm yet firm, "you've always been stronger than you give yourself credit for. The world has a way of testing us, of throwing us into situations we didn't anticipate. But what matters is how we respond. You faced challenges before and you'll face many more in the future. But each time you will learn, you will grow, and you will emerge stronger. Charlotte nodded, taking in her father's words. She had always admired his ability to remain calm and collected, no matter the circumstances. But now, she was beginning to understand that strength didn't always come from external composure. It came from within. It was about embracing the vulnerability that life brought and using it as a source of growth. It was about accepting that there would always be moments of uncertainty, but that those moments didn't have to define her. As the days went on, Charlotte began to step back into her royal duties with a renewed sense of purpose. She attended public events and met with dignitaries, as she always had, but now she did so with a deeper understanding of her role. She realized that being a leader wasn't just about maintaining an image of perfection. It was about showing the world that even the most powerful individuals had moments of doubt, fear, and vulnerability. It was about being real, about being authentic. One of the first public appearances she made after the security incident was at a charity gala, an event that brought together influential figures from around the world. As she entered the grand ballroom, she felt the familiar gaze of the guests upon her. The elegant decor, the shimmering chandeliers, and the soft music playing in the background all contributed to the atmosphere of opulence. But Charlotte wasn't focused on the grandeur of the evening. She was focused on the people, the ones who were there to support the causes that mattered most to her. As she mingled with the guests, Charlotte found herself genuinely engaged in the conversations. She listened to the stories of those who had dedicated their lives to philanthropy, and she shared her own thoughts on the importance of charity work. The guests who had always admired her now saw her in a new light. She wasn't just a figurehead of the royal family. She was someone who cared deeply about the world around her. She was more than just a symbol. She was a person with passions, struggles, and a heart that was committed to making a difference. As the night wore on, Charlotte found herself in a conversation with an older woman who had dedicated her life to environmental conservation. The woman spoke with such passion about her work that Charlotte felt inspired by her words. They spoke for hours, discussing everything from the importance of sustainability to the need for global cooperation in addressing climate change. For the first time in a long while, Charlotte felt a sense of fulfillment that had nothing to do with the pressures of her royal duties. It was a reminder that there was more to life than the title she carried. Later that evening, as Charlotte returned to the palace, she reflected on the night's events. For the first time since the security incident, she felt a sense of peace. She had been herself, authentic, engaged, and connected to the people around her. She no longer felt the need to hide behind a mask of perfection. She had learned that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. It was through embracing her vulnerability that she had found her true power. The days turned into weeks, and as Charlotte continued to find her balance, the palace staff noticed a change in her. She no longer seemed burdened by the weight of the royal responsibilities. She had learned to navigate the delicate balance between her personal needs and her public duties. And though the events of that day still lingered in her memory, she had learned to move forward. The princess who had once been seen as untouchable was now seen as someone who had faced hardship and emerged stronger, someone who had grown from the experience and become more human in the process. Her relationship with her guards, too, had evolved. She no longer saw them as mere protectors, but as partners, people who were there to ensure her safety, yes, but also to support her through the ups and downs of life. She had learned to trust them, not just with her life, but with her vulnerabilities. And in doing so, she had created a bond with them that was deeper than she had ever expected. As the weeks passed, the incident that had once seemed so monumental began to fade into the background. Charlotte had grown from it, and though it would always be a part of her story, it no longer defined her. She had found a new sense of purpose, a renewed sense of self. And as she continued her royal duties, she did so with the knowledge that even in the face of uncertainty, she could find strength. It was a new chapter in her life, one where she embraced her humanity, her imperfections, and her vulnerabilities. And in doing so, she became the kind of leader she had always aspired to be: strong, compassionate, and above all, real.